The Trump administration is seeing a mass exodus of legal talent. More than 10,000 government lawyers have left since the beginning of 2025, according to a New York Times analysis. Now, as one former lawyer put it, it's leaving some agencies without the staff to get stuff done. But President Trump is calling this a very good thing, writing on Truth Social, quote, "The people who are leaving are radical left deep state lunatics who are destroying our country." Joining us now, Jim Messina, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations and campaign manager for Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin is here in studio with me. Lisa, just can you even quantify what the real life consequences are of losing 10,000 government lawyers?
It's staggering, Chris. And in some departments, according to the New York Times, that loss is particularly pernicious. I'm just looking at a chart that they put together with their reporting. The Education Department, for example, has lost more than 50% of their lawyers between December of 2024.
All right, folks. Welcome to Jack Mockler Right Now. Trump's legal apparatus is experiencing a mass exodus of talent from personal defense teams, cabinet positions, and federal agencies, with thousands departing across jurisdictions. The president has publicly called this very good, but the systematic collapse of legal expertise is a documented pattern with serious consequences for governance. Let me take you back to where this pattern really started making headlines, because it didn't begin yesterday and it didn't begin in 2026. This has been a long time coming, and understanding how we got here requires going back to the moment when the public first got a real glimpse of just how unstable Trump's relationship with his legal representation had become. The first major sign that something was seriously wrong came in January 2021, and the timing could not have been worse. Trump was staring down his second impeachment trial in the United States Senate, a proceeding that would determine whether he could ever hold federal office again. This was existential for his political future.
And March of 2026. That means at certain of these departments, there are not enough lawyers to just get the basic work of the department done. And of course, we have been covering here at MS Now for many months the decimation of career ranks at the Department of Justice. This is taking a much broader look at the federal government as a whole. The Justice Department actually falls fairly low on this list in terms of departments that have lost lawyers. They're down 21%. But across the whole government, the federal government, the loss of these lawyers means a loss of expertise that really matters. And, you know, I hear that the president is saying that radical leftists are now out of the government. I'm not sure how many radical leftists were lawyers at the Agriculture Department, but, you know, maybe he can tell us differently.
Yeah, Jim, according to the New York Times, a lot of the lawyers interested in public service are now going instead to the offices of Democratic state attorneys general, to nonprofits that are challenging the administration's policies in court. You got to wonder if this could backfire in more ways than one.
And his entire legal team, led by a South Carolina attorney named Butch Bowers, simply quit. Just like that. The whole team, gone, with barely more than a week before the Senate trial was scheduled to begin. A week. 7 days. And this wasn't some carefully managed transition where one team handed off to another. This was a collapse. This was the people who were supposed to stand up in the Senate chamber and make the case for why Trump should not be removed from office and barred from ever running again, deciding that they were done. They had had enough. They were walking away. The reports at the time described fundamental disagreements between Trump and his lawyers over the actual strategy for how to defend him. Think about what that means in practical terms. You have a Senate trial starting in 8 days. Your entire legal team quits.
Boy, you really do. You know, when I was Deputy Chief of Staff at the White House, you realize across government, you have the finest career people that you can possibly imagine who are spending their life making way less than they could in the private sector because they believe in America. And you also realize you can't get anything done in these places without good lawyers. And hollowing out the legal talent across the entire spectrum of the government, to Lisa's point, it's not just DOJ, it's all over the place. And now what you're seeing is these organizations can't get anything done. What is the number one thing voters want? They want government to work again. They want government to move fast. They want government to care about them. None of that is happening when you hollow out these ranks. And to your point, where you're actually seeing the real work done on holding this administration accountable is now the state attorneys generals. And so a lot of them went to the state attorneys generals and said, hey, let me continue my work with you. And I think that's been a very good thing. And you're seeing the state attorney generals actually hold Donald Trump accountable for his actions.
Is this the kind of thing that's messageable on the campaign trail, Jim? I mean, if Democrats, let's say, regain power,
you now have to scramble on a deadline to find new lawyers willing to take one of the highest profile cases in American political history with essentially no time to prepare, no time to get up to speed, no time to develop a coherent defense strategy from scratch. It's a nightmare scenario for any client, let alone one facing the most serious political consequences imaginable. And Trump's spokesman at the time put out a statement that said they had done much work but had not made a final decision on their legal team. That is a polished, professional way of saying our house is on fire and we are desperately calling the fire department. It's the kind of statement that's technically true, but completely obscures the chaos happening behind the scenes. The trial went forward anyway because the calendar doesn't stop for personnel problems.
Do they talk about how to fix it? Is the goal simply to restore the federal government to what it was like before Trump? Or could this be an opportunity to talk about building something new and, one would hope, better?
It's absolutely an opportunity. Part of what Democrats have to be seen as people that can reform government, that can make government move faster, that can make government produce things for the American public. And this gives us an opportunity to say, hey, how do we reimagine this? Whoever the next president of the United States is going to walk into a completely broken government. And that'll be a really difficult task. But it's also an opportunity, Chris, to reimagine it and make it move faster and better.
What's harder to rebuild? Here's a Rubik's Cube of a question, Jim. Public trust in government or talented people willing to work there?
Both. And the problem is you can't restore trust if you don't have talented people. You know, Barack Obama always says, he's like, I want people around me who get things done, who are doers. And now we have a whole lot less doers that can reform government. And I think that is a very big challenge. Even if you have all the best intentions in the world, as Lisa well knows, you still need really competent people around you who can get this stuff done. And we just got rid of tens of thousands of them at exactly the wrong time.
The new team he assembled went in underprepared, trying to absorb weeks of preparation in days. Trump was ultimately acquitted, but not because of any brilliant lawyering or compelling legal arguments. He was acquitted because Senate Republicans had already decided they were not going to convict him regardless of what any attorney argued. The outcome was essentially predetermined, but the pattern had been set, and it was going to keep repeating and repeated it did. That was just the beginning of what would become a recurring theme throughout Trump's legal travails. Fast forward to 2023, and the situation had only gotten more serious. Trump was now facing federal criminal charges related to classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. This was not a political process in the Senate. This was a real criminal case in a real federal court with real consequences. This is the kind of situation where having steady, experienced senior federal defense attorneys is not optional. It is absolutely essential. And his top lawyers on that case, Jim Trusty and John Rowley, two experienced attorneys who had been handling the most serious legal threat to Trump's personal freedom, resigned soon after the indictment was filed. They resigned right after the charges came down, right when it mattered most, right when the case was about to get real in ways that would determine whether Trump might actually face prison time. Trump went on Truth Social to announce their replacements, praising Trusty and Rowley on the way out, while simultaneously calling the prosecutors corrupt and dishonest and framing the whole thing as political persecution. It was the classic Trump move, acknowledging the departure while immediately pivoting to attack the people who brought the case. And then the new lawyer stepped in, and the process started all over again. New faces learning a complex case under pressure. New people trying to absorb months of discovery and legal strategy in a matter of weeks. And every time that happens, every time a legal team has to restart, that is time that could have been spent on strategy, being spent on getting up to speed instead. His former personal attorney, Jay Sekulow, who had been there for the first impeachment trial and was a known experienced face in high-profile defense work, would not take part in the second trial at all. His most experienced impeachment counsel sat that one out. His classified documents lawyers quit after the indictment. His personal legal team has turned through attorneys at a rate that legal analysts started describing as structurally abnormal. Not just inconvenient, not just unlucky, but structurally abnormal. This is the language that professionals use when they see something that defies normal explanation. And they've explained why representing Trump requires navigating an unusual set of tensions. He tends to want to control the messaging in ways that can conflict directly with what lawyers are professionally and ethically allowed to say in court. He has a pattern of attacking judges and prosecutors publicly, while those same judges and prosecutors are deciding outcomes in his cases. He pushes defense strategies that experienced attorneys know cannot be supported legally. And when lawyers follow the rules their profession requires them to follow, rules that exist to protect the client as much as anyone else, the relationship breaks down. Now let me slow down on the why for a second, because this is the part that most coverage just glosses over. When a high-profile client keeps losing lawyers, most people assume it is the client's fault. They assume it's some kind of personal conflict, a personality clash, someone getting fired or feeling disrespected. And sometimes it is that. Sometimes it really is just a case of two strong personalities not being able to get along. But there is a deeper, more structural reason why experienced attorneys keep walking away from Trump, and it comes down to something that most viewers have never heard of, but that every lawyer learns in their first year of law school. It's called the duty of candor to the tribunal. Every licensed attorney in the United States is bound by professional rules that require them to be honest with courts. Not just accurate on the small stuff, but fundamentally, essentially honest. An attorney cannot make a legal argument they know to be false. They cannot present evidence they know to be fabricated. They cannot tell a judge something they know is untrue. These aren't suggestions. These are binding professional obligations that can cost you your license if you violate them. And if a client is pushing a defense strategy built on claims that the attorneys know cannot be supported, those attorneys have a real problem. They can advise the client. They can push back. They can try to explain why certain arguments won't work. But ultimately, they cannot walk into a courtroom and make that argument without risking their license, their reputation, and potentially sanctions from the court itself. That tension between what a client wants said and what the lawyers know they can ethically say is what legal analysts kept pointing to as Trump's legal teams kept turning over. Experienced attorneys are not just hired guns who argue whatever they are told to argue. They are licensed professionals with ethical obligations that exist independently of what the client wants. And when those obligations keep clashing with what the client demands, the relationship becomes untenable. Not because the lawyers are cowards or disloyal, but because they have careers and licenses they have spent years building and they are not willing to torch them. That is the real mechanism behind the pattern. And understanding it changes how you look at every single one of these departures. Now here's where the story stops being about one man's turbulent relationship with his personal attorneys and starts being about something much larger, something that affects how this government actually functions. Because what has happened to legal talent inside the Trump administration since he returned to power is not a personnel hiccup. It is not a few people leaving to spend more time with their families. It is a documented, measurable, ongoing collapse of legal capacity across the entire executive branch. And I want to walk you through the numbers carefully because they are genuinely shocking when you put them all together. This isn't anecdotal. This isn't rumor. This is hard data, and the data tells a devastating story. Let's start with the big picture. When Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, the federal government employed roughly 37,000 civilian lawyers across every department and agency. That's Justice Department prosecutors, regulatory attorneys, immigration judges, appellate lawyers, everyone who practices law on behalf of the United States government. These are the people who enforce federal law, defend federal policies, and represent the American people in court. By March of 2026, that number had dropped by about 17%. More than 6,000 lawyers gone in just over a year. That's not attrition, that's a hemorrhage. The Department of Education lost 53% of its legal staff. More than half of the lawyers who were supposed to be defending the administration's education policies simply gone. The Department of Housing and Urban Development lost 40% of its lawyers. The Justice Department itself, which is the crown jewel of the federal legal operation, lost around 5,500 people total. Not all of them attorneys, but a significant chunk of them through a combination of voluntary resignations, buyouts, and outright firings. And here is the specific number that should stop you cold. The DOJ's appellate section, the unit responsible for defending the administration's policies in federal appeals courts. These are the lawyers arguing before the courts that are deciding whether Trump's executive orders are legal, whether his policies can stand, whether he wins or loses on the biggest legal fights of his presidency. That section lost over 40% of its attorneys since February 2025. More than 4 out of every 10 experienced appellate lawyers gone. And the attorney who disclosed this did so in a court filing trying to explain to a federal judge why her office needed more time on a case. She wrote that at this time it is not possible for me to assign this case to yet another attorney who would need to devote time to learning the issues. That is a government lawyer telling a judge in writing that they do not have enough people to do the work, and the work involves defending the president's own policies in court. That's not spin. That's not political rhetoric. That's a sworn statement in a legal filing. Now, Trump was asked about all of this. The New York Times published a story about the mass exodus of legal talent from his administration. They called it a striking exodus, and they documented in detail the scale and scope of the departures. And Trump went on Truth Social and said it was very good. He called the lawyers who were leaving radical left deep state lunatics who were destroying the country. He said many of them didn't leave but were fired. He celebrated it. And his White House press secretary said the people being hired are extremely qualified and talented. Okay. But here's the thing. The experienced appellate attorneys who left are in many cases now working for Democratic state attorneys general and nonprofit organizations that are actively suing the Trump administration in court. So the lawyers who used to defend these policies are now on the other side fighting against them with institutional knowledge, with experience, with understanding of exactly how the DOJ argues these cases. They know the playbook because they wrote it. That is not a situation you celebrate. That is a self-inflicted wound of the highest order. And then there is the special situation with Trump's own personal loyalists who he installed as U.S. attorneys. Alina Habba, she was one of Trump's most visible personal attorneys during his legal battles, appearing on television, defending him constantly, showing up at press conferences, fighting in his corner as publicly and loudly as anyone. He installed her as the acting U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey. A powerful position, a real job with real authority, and a federal appeals court ruled she was serving in the position unlawfully. The appointment process had not been followed correctly. She was legally disqualified. She resigned in December 2025, saying she was stepping down to protect the stability and integrity of the office. Trump called it a shame. And it wasn't just Habba. Another former Trump attorney, Lindsay Halligan, was installed as the top federal prosecutor for the Eastern District of Virginia. She was also disqualified by a federal judge because of how her appointment was handled, and the consequences of that disqualification were immediate and severe. The grand jury indictments she had obtained, including indictments against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, 2 people Trump had publicly targeted, were thrown into chaos because the person who had obtained those indictments was found to have been serving illegally. Cases that were supposed to be the administration's most dramatic uses of prosecutorial power suddenly had questions hanging over their validity. That's the thing most coverage misses about the lawyer departure story. It's not just about optics or about whether Trump looks bad when lawyers quit on him. It's about outcomes. It's about whether the administration can actually win in court when its own legal bench is this depleted. The appellate section losing 40% of its attorneys means the government is walking into federal appeals courts understaffed, sometimes unprepared, sometimes having to ask for delays because there literally is not a lawyer available to argue the case. And those courts are where the biggest legal fights of this presidency are being decided right now. Courts are ruling on immigration policy, on executive power, on tariffs, on the Epstein files, on everything. And the people who are supposed to be standing up in those courtrooms defending the administration's positions are leaving faster than they can be replaced. In the replacement pipeline, the people the administration is actually hiring to fill these slots, reporting describes them as more conservative and politically aligned with the president, which is the stated goal. but also as younger attorneys with little relevant experience or mid-career attorneys with no background in federal prosecution or people coming from political backgrounds in Republican congressional offices rather than from any tradition of serious federal legal work. The nation's top law schools, Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, the places that have historically fed the most talented graduates into the Justice Department and made it one of the most formidable law offices in the world, those schools are producing graduates who increasingly do not want to work for this administration. Some of those schools have been attacked by the administration directly. The recruiting pipeline that produced the experienced lawyers who are now leaving has been disrupted at the source. So what you have is not one dramatic resignation moment. You have a slow motion hollowing out of legal expertise happening across every level, from the president's personal defense attorneys all the way down to the line prosecutors arguing immigration cases in district court. And the administration's response to this has been to call it good news. Let me tell you why that's such a dangerous miscalculation. When you lose experienced lawyers, you lose institutional memory. You lose knowledge of precedent, knowledge of how specific judges rule, knowledge of what arguments work and what arguments fail. You lose relationships with court staff, with opposing counsel, with the entire ecosystem that makes federal litigation work. You can't replace that with loyalty or political alignment. You can't replace it with enthusiasm or ideological commitment. Experience matters in court. It's the difference between winning and losing, between getting a favorable ruling and getting your policy struck down. And right now, the administration is bleeding experience at a rate that should terrify anyone who cares about the success of its agenda. Let's bring it all together now because we need to understand exactly what this means and why it matters so much. The personal lawyer departures were a warning sign that most people wrote off too quickly. When the entire impeachment team quit in 2021, people laughed. When the classified documents attorneys resigned after the indictment, people noted it and moved on. But those early episodes were telling you something important about what was coming. They were telling you that there is something about this particular client, this particular working environment, this particular set of demands that makes it very difficult for experienced attorneys to stay. The ethical constraints of the legal profession, the rules about what you can and cannot say in court, about what arguments you can and cannot make, exist for good reasons. And when a client keeps colliding with those constraints, experienced lawyers who value their licenses and their reputations eventually make a calculation. And repeatedly, the calculation has been to leave. The numbers now are not about personal drama. They are about institutional capacity. 17% fewer federal government lawyers than when Trump took office. 40% of the DOJ appellate section gone. 53% of Education Department lawyers out. 5,500 total departures from the Justice Department. These are not people who had personality conflicts with one client. These are career public servants who built careers defending the United States government in court, who made a decision that this particular version of that job was not one they could do. And the downstream consequences are already showing up. Cases getting delayed because there are not enough attorneys. Immigration courts with a backlog of over 3 million cases and not enough judges. Prosecutors not being available to take on new work. These are not hypothetical future risks. These are things that are happening right now. The loyalist appointments backfired in ways that directly damage the administration's own agenda. This is the piece that gets the least attention and deserves the most. Haba and Halligan were installed in powerful prosecutorial positions because of their loyalty to Trump, and they were disqualified by courts because the appointment process was not followed correctly. The cases they had been pursuing, cases that were supposed to show that the administration was going after his enemies, those cases were suddenly in legal jeopardy. The indictments they had obtained became questionable. The whole strategy of using loyal attorneys in key prosecutorial positions to pursue administration priorities got undercut by the fact that the courts found the appointments themselves to be illegal. Loyalty is not a substitute for process, and when you skip the process in favor of loyalty, the courts tend to notice. The administration celebrated the exodus, and that tells you everything about how they see lawyers. Trump said losing thousands of lawyers from the federal government was very good. He said the people leaving were radical left lunatics. He framed experienced career attorneys, many of whom served through multiple administrations of both parties, as the enemy. And in doing so, He essentially described his own legal operation as better off without institutional expertise. But those experienced lawyers are now working against him. They are in the offices of state attorneys general who are suing the administration. They are at nonprofit legal organizations challenging his policies. They took their knowledge of how the DOJ thinks and argues, and how federal courts work, and they walked across the aisle and joined the other side. And you cannot take that institutional knowledge back just by calling the people who left lunatics on social media. So why does all of this matter to you? Here's the honest reason. Because the legal system is how the rules get enforced in this country, not just rules about whether Trump personally goes to jail or pays damages to E. Jean Carroll. Rules about immigration policy, about what agencies can and cannot do, about whether executive orders are constitutional, about whether the government can deport people without due process, about whether the administration's tariffs are legal, about all of it. And the people who are supposed to be defending those policies in court, fighting for them in front of federal judges, are leaving at a rate that the administration's own court filings have now accidentally confirmed. And the replacements, wherever they can be found, are starting from scratch on the most complicated legal fights in modern American government. Who benefits from all of this? The state attorneys general who are challenging Trump's policies in court have never been better staffed. The nonprofits litigating against administration actions have experienced former DOJ attorneys who understand exactly how the government argues these cases. The plaintiffs going up against federal policies have never had more help from the other side of the courtroom. And who loses? Potentially the policies themselves. You can have the boldest executive agenda in generations. You can issue the most sweeping executive orders. You can announce the most dramatic policy changes. But if the team defending all of it in court is understaffed, inexperienced, or too depleted to keep up with the caseload, those policies can get struck down, stayed, or delayed indefinitely by judges. Courts do not care about press releases. Courts care about the arguments in front of them. And right now, the quality of the arguments on the administration side is a genuine open question. What comes next? Watch the immigration courts, where a backlog of over 3 million cases is piling up with not enough judges to hear them. Watch the appellate fights over Trump's biggest executive orders, where a 40% depleted appellate section is going to have to stand up in circuit courts and make the case. Watch whether the administration can rebuild its legal bench with qualified people before the most consequential cases reach their conclusions. And watch whether the pattern of the last several years holds. The pattern where lawyers, one after another, at every level, keep making the same calculation that whatever is being asked of them in this environment is something they are not willing to put their name on. The administration is losing experienced lawyers who knew how to defend its agenda, replaced by loyalists less equipped for the courtroom battles ahead. When the president celebrates the departure of skilled legal talent, governance itself suffers, and the courts, cases, and policies will bear the consequences for years.